Hey guys, it's Paradise, and some of the most powerful skills were added into Elden Ring through the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. With these being so powerful and having such great versatility across different weapons, we wanted to wrap together 3 of our favourite Fire Knight builds, each with completely different weapon categories, but similar overall builds, meaning it's not too difficult to try each of them out to find the playstyle you like. All of them deal massive damage, are fun to play, and have the Fire Knight theme, and to be honest, I think one of these builds would be my go-to choice to play through the DLC again. Drop a like and comment below if you're enjoying the video, share any cool builds that you've been trying out, and do tell us if you're going to try any of these ones out. First up, we'll begin with the Black Steel Twinblade build. Interestingly, this weapon is infusible and Ash of War customizable, but also has a passive on it, giving it an extra amount of holy damage no matter what you infuse it to, and it does state that it amplifies the effect when infused with holy damage. Now, there are conflicting opinions about this weapon online and the best way to build it. Many people are loving the Sacred Blade Ash of War with the holy infusion, giving it a ton of holy damage. This is definitely a solid way to go, but I have found that the Flame Skewer or Flame Spear Fire Knight Ash of War actually works exceptionally well for it, giving it a spread of physical fire and holy damage, with the extra AR bonus of the Flame Skewer Ash of War or the Flame Spear Ash of War, making it a real beast. All in all, after trying both versions of this on the same enemies, I actually feel like the Flame Skewer or the Flame Spear Ash of War with the Flame Art infusion is probably the way to go, again at least from my testing, and this way we can focus on Dex and Faith. It also is worth noting that this is a Fire Knight Ash of War, so the Mesmer helmet will synergize very well with all of these builds, so if you've beaten Mesmer, slap that helmet on. The awesome thing about the Black Steel Twinblade though is that it's very easy to pick up here on the map, starting at the High Road Cross Grace Point. Just follow this route that I'm showing you and jump up on the cliff into this little camp where you'll see a single Black Knight to kill that guarantees this weapon as a drop. If you get a friend to drop you a second one or replay through the DLC, you can actually power stance these together to kind of unlock the ultimate version of this build. But do note it is still awesome with just one. The idea is to use the Flame Skewer Ash of War on your enemy and then do the rapid hits of the Twinblade moveset in between. This allows for extremely high burst damage, and the quick execution of your power stance attacks and the speed of the Ash of War make this a very strong build. So for everything in terms of your gear, armor, and talismans, of course you want 2 or even 1 of the Black Steel Twinblade, of course maxed out to plus 25. It's really nice having 2, but it does work with a single one as said before. For your seal, it doesn't really matter because unless you want to use offensive incantations, the scaling doesn't really apply to the buffs. So I'm bringing the Erdtree seal, but bring the one that you sort of prefer or that you have. We're going to use this for basically for our Golden Vow, for our Flame Grant Me Strength, and for our Bestial Vitality buffs. Then for our helmet, we're going with the Cursed Blade Mask. This is because, as you can see over on our stats, this will actually give us plus 5 dexterity, which does factor into our physical damage on the actual weapon, and plus 5 is quite a lot. Of course, Rakshas's armor set is going to be great as this increases our total damage dealt, but we do take a bit more damage in return, but I feel like it's worth it, so we hit really, really hard. The Shard of Alexander is going to be really great just to boost up your Flame Skewer or Flame Spear Ash of War, depending on the one you want to bring. And I do like to bring the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, as these actually stack together, giving us an incrementally increasing attack power buff as we hit rapidly, which with our jump attacks and L1 attacks, we certainly do hit rapidly, and Millicent's also gives us an extra bit of dexterity as well. So these two work really nicely for these weapons. And of course, the Fire Scorpion Charm is going to be spot on to raise our fire damage. As you can see, our actual weapons themselves have a ton of fire damage, so that's going to be a big bonus to us. Then it comes to our Wondrous Physics mix, and I'm sure it won't be a surprise to any of you that are sort of theory crafters or build makers yourselves. We're going to go with the Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear for that fire damage boost again, as a lot of our damage is coming from fire, and the Thorny Cracked Tear for that consecutive attacks growing in strength. So we have a ton of bonuses, all compounding together on fire damage, consecutive strikes, a bunch of dexterity, and all of that good stuff. Then for our stats, I recommend between 50 and 60 Vigor. At least 20 Mind, enough to buff yourself up. 25 Endurance is nice. Higher is nicer to have a bit more to play with because you do run out of Endurance quite quickly, but 25 is my own sweet spot. For Strength, you will need 18 as a requirement for the weapon. For Dexterity, get it as high as possible. Around 50 will be ideal. Dump Intelligence, dump Arcane, and push Faith again as high as possible. If you are a higher level than me, get this to 80. You want to push Faith to literally up to 80 as high as you can. Of course, at my level 154, I have 52 faith currently. And next up is the Fire Knight's Shortsword build. Not many people seem to be talking about this weapon, and it is in fact a dagger despite its short sword name. But it's also a Fire Knight's weapon, which means it has passive fire damage on it and an extra boost for fire infusions. This means, similar to the Black Steel Twinblade, this weapon comes with an extra baseline of fire damage baked into it that can then be expanded upon if we slap on the Flame Spear Ash of War with the Flame Art infusion. We can't use the Flame Skewer on this weapon, but the Flame Spear does work very well. When you do this, it also primarily scales with Faith, meaning we can purely focus on the Faith stat to get even higher fire damage and have some more leeway in our other stat lines. The daggers are extremely rapid hitting, have access to a ranged attack with the Flame Spear Ash of War, and can be power stanced if you get 2 of them, allowing for very strong and quick double dagger attacks. These things are pretty simple to get, but they are a rare drop. The best place to farm them is in the Shadow Keep, and there's plenty of red mage enemies near the 1st floor Grace Point that you want to kill and focus on the ones holding the dagger. The 7th floor Grace Point is also a great spot to farm if you have unlocked it. For this one, the build is largely similar to the previous build, making them very easy to switch between, but of course we're using the Fire Knight's Shortsword, and ideally you want 2 of these at plus 25 in each hand, of course with the Flame Spear. I like to use the Erdtree seal once again. This will allow us to buff up, and because we are more faith focused, we'll get to the stats in just a sec, you can bring offensive faith incantations if you would like to. Now for the helmet, of course the Mesmer's helmet is probably the best in slot here, but if you don't have that, the Erdtree Knight helm is pretty good too, as this will give you a nice +2 to your faith. As before, Rakshasa's armor set is fantastic. It increases all of the damage we deal, but we do take a bit more damage in return, but I do think it's worth it. Then we have the Shard of Alexander. This will buff our Flame Spear, which we do want to be using, as it does put a fire and AR buff on our weapon after casting it, so this just buffs the actual damage of the Flame Spear. And then of course we have the successive attack talismans, so the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and the Millicent's Prosthesis will stack together, giving us an incrementally increasing attack bonus, and it is a percentage bonus, which is really good. Of course, with double daggers, we're hitting super quick, so these really do rack up, and the extra dexterity from the Prosthesis here is also pretty nice. Of course, as this is a Fire Knight build and we are speccing heavily into fire damage, the Fire Scorpion Charm is going to be what you want to have. And for our actual Wondrous Physics mix, it's going to be pretty much the same as the previous build in this video. You basically want to have the Fire Shrouding Crack Tier for that extra fire damage boost, and the Thorny Crack Tier because we are going to be doing those consecutive hits very rapidly with the double daggers. For the stats on this, I recommend between 50 and 60 Vigor, as we are going to be very up close and personal. 60 Vigor is going to be very nice. For mines, you don't really need much more than 20 just to enable you to use the Ash of War in your buffs. For your endurance, between 25 and 30, maybe even a little higher will be nice, because stamina can be a problem with this one. For your strength, the requirement of the weapon is 8, so make sure you have that. And for your dexterity, the requirement of the weapon is 13, so also make sure you have that. Dump intelligence and dump arcane, and then pump faith as high as you can. Ideally, you want to get it to 80, as this will be the last soft cap, and is where primarily our damage will come from with the scaling of this weapon. And we have the go-to choice for many. It's the Fire Knight's Greatsword build, renowned for being one of the best weapons added in the DLC. As a Fire Knight's weapon, this also has the passive fire damage baked into it, but it also synergizes very well with the Flame Skewer Ash of War. As a greatsword, it also deals great damage by itself, and it scales incredibly well with Faith at B rank with this Flame Art. Due to the Flame Skewer's fast animation and the greatsword moveset itself being shared with one of the better options for greatswords, this weapon is not only powerful but also very fun and clean to play with. You can get this by farming the red mages in the Shadow Keep once again, but this time it needs to be the ones holding the greatsword. There's a really easy one to farm from the 1st floor Grace Point. Just turn around, head down the elevator, and once you get to the bottom where there'll be a mage, you can kill this guy, and there's a very low chance to get it, so it will take a few tries to actually get it as a drop. So the build this time around for the Greatsword version is a little bit different, but largely there is a lot of overlap. Of course, you want the Fire Knight's Greatsword at plus 25 and your favorite seal to do those buffs. Of course, the Mesmer Helm, as mentioned previously, is pretty much the best option for all of these builds if you have it, and on my PlayStation save, I luckily do have it, so it's pretty nice to actually have it if you have beaten Mesmer. For your armor set though, Rakshasa's is again the standard, increasing all of the damage you deal but taking a little bit more damage in return. Again, the trade-off to me is worth it. The Fire Scorpion Charm is a no-brainer, as we are primarily dealing fire damage. I mean, look at the massive fire damage on this thing, around 600 and 19 fire damage. It is crazy. I like the Old Lord's Talisman as this extends the buff duration that you'll be casting on yourself, so keeping Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength up a bit longer, in my opinion, is quite nice with this talisman. Of course, Shard of Alexander to boost that flame skewer damage on our Greatsword is going to be a big help, and we can use the two-handed sword talisman on this one, as we will be two-handing the actual Greatsword, so we'll get a chunk of extra damage from that too. For our wondrous physics mix, of course we want the Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear once again, as we have so much fire damage, but for this one I actually recommend the Blood Sucking Cracked Tear, as we just hit like an absolute truck with it being a Greatsword and Flame Skewer being so strong that the extra 20% buff from this, even at the cost of our health draining, is worth it in my opinion. For our stats though, of course I recommend between 40 to 60 Vigor, go higher if you're struggling, go lower if you're not struggling. For Mind, 20 to 25 is a nice area to be to have enough mana to buff up. For Endurance, you could do between 25 and 35, again depending on the armor set that you want to play with and how much stamina struggling that you're coming into. For Strength and Dexterity, you could actually dump this for the actual weapon requirement, which is 22 Strength and 18 Dex. I'm a bit higher level on my PlayStation save, so I've gone for 30-30. For Intelligence, dump this stat. For Arcane, dump this stat. And for Faith, juice it as high as possible, simply because the actual Greatsword has that B scaling with Faith and then E on Strength and Dex, so Faith is going to be our primary source of damage here. Well guys, tell me what you think of these builds down in the comments below, and if you're going to try any of them out, or if you have your own iterations of them, I'd love to learn what you've done differently. And make sure you're subscribed for more Elden Ring coming your way very soon.